Bon après-midi, collègues.
Good afternoon, colleagues and our guests. Chair, as you know, the Minister of the Environment here at the committee said that he would give us the figures on all of the meetings, the leases, and so on, as well as the senators involved in 232, Bill C 232. Do you have any information about that? Well, unfortunately, I have to say, after the union, I will go through an intermediary to try to obtain information. I looked for it yesterday, and I looked for him. I can give you his telephone number if you like. Perhaps I should have called rather than waiting to hear from someone. But then again, I will look into it after the meeting. So I'll give you my 100% commitment that that is exactly what I will do post-meeting.
On Tuesday, but I was watching intently while trying to deal with my new baby.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. You did mention that, my apologies. You did mention that you were going to talk to Minister Guilbeault, I believe it was yesterday?
Yeah, I looked for him yesterday. I couldn't find him yesterday.
Okay.
And as Mr. Deltel suggested, there's something called the telephone. I could have called him. I didn't think of that. I mea culpa. But after this meeting, I will endeavor to get the answer through an intermediary, unless I see him in the next half hour, which I don't think I will. But I'm on it. I'm on it. Yeah.
Report a motion to the House. Him to call you. Would that help?
I don't know. That's
Is there agreement?
You're the expert in parliamentary procedure, Mr.
Is there
James.
agreement to do that?
Okay.
Seems like there's agreement. There's agreement of the committee.
I don't think there's agreement. No. Okay. Juste pour une petite mise à jour là.
Just for a brief update, we have our travel budget for our trip to Alberta. All parties are in agreement to do that during the riding week. That is the week of May 13. There is agreement, therefore, on that. And Madame Posé, the sound tests have been carried out successfully, I trust. I would like now then to welcome Mr. Weir and Mr. Schreier from the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, and also I welcome Madame Rebecca Petrin, Gabrielle Leroy-Grégoire from Au Secours, and we have Mr. Nero and Clark from the University of Calgary. And
so we'll get started with opening statements. I'll just go in the order in which the names appear on my sheet here. So who will be speaking on behalf of the University of Calgary? Is it Mr. Clark or Mr. Pietro Nero?
We'll be sharing the discussion.
Okay, so you have 5 minutes. You can share it whichever way you feel is best.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. We want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to the committee today, and we're both honored to have been afforded the time of the committee. So this brief is being provided to underscore the critical need for a cohesive and collaborative approach to environmental prediction in Canada. We strongly advocate developing a cooperative institute that supports collaboration across academia, government, and industry. First, we know environmental predictions play a pivotal role in decision-making processes, influencing strategies related to infrastructure development, environmental stewardship, resource allocation, and public safety. However, the absence of a cohesive and nationally coordinated prediction system in Canada has led to a fragmented prediction landscape. Academic contributions often exist as disjointed short-term projects, while government capabilities are unevenly distributed across provincial and federal jurisdiction. And this fragmentation results in inconsistent resource allocation and duplicated services.
We argue that there are glaring opportunities to establish a national community of practice in environmental prediction. Canada is the only G7 country without coordinated capabilities for predicting environmental risks. It is critical to support collaboration across the provincial, territorial, and federal governments, academia, and the private sector to strengthen resilience to environmental change. The proposed solution will enable research and operational groups across Canada to contribute their unique data, information, knowledge, and predictive capabilities to support mitigating and adapting to water crises. The Cooperative Institute will support the development of next-generation capabilities to predict floods, droughts, water quality hotspots, wildfires, and ecosystem health. We propose the creation of a Canadian Cooperative Institute for Environmental Prediction, inspired by successful models such as the Cooperative Institute program in the United States. This Cooperative Institute would serve as a hub, integrating research across universities, government bodies, and the private sector. The proposed Cooperative Institute is essential to develop the data, information, and predictive capabilities crucial for climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. The proposed strategy outlines key transformations necessary for Canada to emerge as a global leader in environmental prediction. It advocates for a shift from a traditional loading dock approach to a more strategic focus on critical science and engineering questions. The Cooperative Institute will modernize the prediction ecosystem for Canada to accelerate the transfer of prediction technologies from research to operations. The Cooperative Institute will do this by developing a computational prediction framework that will serve as a shadow system for the operational systems employed by Environment and Climate Change Canada and the provinces and territories, enabling scientists from both the research and operational communities to rapidly develop and evaluate new modelling and prediction methods. The Cooperative Institute will also support greater collaboration across academia, government, and the private sector, including developing shared computing solutions, establishing a career track for research scientists at universities, and developing training and exchange programs.
So we recommend the establishment of a federal funding platform allocating $50 million annually for research efforts focused on environmental prediction. Additionally, we propose an ongoing investment of $30 million every 5 years for dedicated data and computer infrastructure. The reality is that we're running short on time to ensure the safety and security of Canadians. The devastating floods, droughts, algal blooms, wildfires, and drinking water advisories that are acutely felt across Canada affect our personal safety, our way of life, the health of our ecosystems, and are having a growing impact on our economy. A Manhattan Project approach to helping us adapt and deal with the coming environmental realities is required, and we believe that the Canada Water Agency affords us an opportunity for this development.
In conclusion, the proposed solutions in this comprehensive briefing represent a pivotal moment for Canada to substantially enhance its predictive capabilities, fortifying the nation's ability to respond effectively to environmental challenges. The only thing missing at this transformational moment is the will and the agency to build and nurture a more dynamic and effective community engaged in environmental prediction. Doing so will require bold and visionary leadership at all levels of government and academia.
Merci, c'est terminé.
Thank you. I believe you have finished. Now we'll move on to Au Secours, and I take it for granted then that it is Madame Pétrin who will be speaking. Yes, exactly, that's correct. The most recent 2023 report of UNESCO that with the climate changes and that there will be great difficulty in terms of water consumption. There have been shortages of water that have been documented in the National Observer just this morning that this is indeed a fact. As the representative of civil law, I'd like to set out three different issues that we see in terms of the responsible and accountable management of water. First of all, there is a knowledge gap. Organizations in Quebec cooperate with many other organizations in the country and also in other countries to discuss the quality of water, the use of water, and its renewal. Second issue is that government levels of government and here I'm referring to from the municipalities all the way up to the federal government, have to face a series of delegation of power. And We note that also that there is a lack of leadership in terms of the Government of Canada with respect to international goals, but also provincial goals, because there is a lack of control and power with respect to those powers that are held by the provinces. Now, with respect to water that it falls under 2 jurisdictions, the ministers have to become accountable. Elected members have to become accountable. The province, of course, has its responsibilities, as does the federal government. There's a case that I'm sure you have heard about, the case of the community of Kanesatake near Montreal, where there are 2 jurisdictions involved, and that has been ongoing for some years. There are federal entities that are implanted within provinces, and they deal with the conservation of the environment and the soil, and they are they stand together as a group sometimes, and that has a negative effect on the provincial jurisdiction. I'm thinking about airports. I'm thinking about other areas where you have the ports, for example. There could be better harmonization in terms of these federal entities that exist within the provinces. And also there's hazardous waste, dangerous waste that exists in the east of the Outaouais. This is federal in jurisdiction, but that can have, for example, at Chalk River, negative effects on the waterways. I want also to put out 2 possibilities that might solve these difficulties. The notion of the Canada Water Agency was very favorably viewed. It has been well received. It is considered to be an observatory for the condition of water. It has a view on the capacity of the provinces, but it also looks to harmonize the provinces' programs. And it has a watchdog role as well with respect to what is ongoing, because in fact there are various 16 objectives of sustainable development, of which water is one. We want, therefore, to be able to have a Canada-wide approach to this. Through this agency, we would be able to have a thorough follow-up of what is going on. And in Quebec, we have a model of governance that is very important. It involves representatives of all levels of society. We are an organization that represents the rights of citizens, so we speak for a Canada-wide organization that would be able to set up a system to better educate the population, to provide better communication between the levels of government and the communities themselves and the citizens. And we know that citizens have a role to play in terms of a political representation. So I think that I have covered everything that we wanted to say. Thank you. I'm going to stop you here, and we'll now move on to the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters. Is it Mr. Schreier who's going to be speaking? Mr. Weir?
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. On behalf of the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, I'd like to thank you for inviting us to talk about the importance of fresh water. The OFAH is Ontario's largest not-for-profit fish and wildlife conservation-based organization, representing 100,000 members, subscribers, and supporters, and 725 member clubs. We strive to ensure the protection of our outdoors heritage, as well as encourage the safe and responsible participation in activities like fishing and hunting, and champion the conservation of Ontario's fish and wildlife resources. So of particular relevance to this committee's discussion is our interest in the management of fresh water, conservation of aquatic habitats, and the ongoing threat of aquatic invasive species. Our team of biologists and professional staff conduct technical analysis and respond to environmental and fisheries-related policies, regulations, legislation at provincial and federal levels. And we also coordinate several programs that benefit fisheries conservation as well. So in our last presentation to committee, we highlighted some of the conservation initiatives the OFH is involved in, such as Ontario's Invading Species Awareness Program, wherein we engage the public on aquatic invasive species, address high-risk pathways, and facilitate monitoring and early detection. We also administer the Lake Ontario Atlantic Salmon Restoration Program and the Community Hatchery Program as well. But today I'd like to take the opportunity to discuss the Canada Water Act and the Canada Water Agency and how these relate to OFAH and our members. From our understanding, the Act and agency are meant to provide for the management of aquatic resources through research and programs involving, among other things, conservation and utilization of water resources. But what are the best ways to keep our water clean and well managed, and what opportunities are there for improving, restoring, and protecting these valuable resources? So our experiences have taught us the importance of connecting people to the outdoors through fishing and hunting. As these activities create value towards natural resources, value promotes stewardship, and stewardship benefits species and their habitats. So while the focus is oftentimes on improving water quality for the purposes of things like clean drinking water and clean beaches, which are obviously important, we see prioritizing recreational fisheries as an excellent opportunity for addressing water-related issues and challenges. So healthy and sustainable fisheries, they're synonymous with clean water resources. They go hand in hand. So focusing on recreational fisheries will help achieve most, if not all, water health and water quality goals and objectives. Fishing contributes to the nutritional needs and the social, economic, and cultural well-being of individuals and communities all across Canada. So therefore, supporting nearly 3 million anglers across Canada who spend close to $19 billion annually, and leveraging opportunities in this way will only pay dividends for the conservation of water resources now and into the future. So like the Recreational Fisheries Conservation Partnerships program, there is a need to reinvigorate a similar program to restore, rebuild, and rehabilitate Canada's recreational fisheries habitat. This can be achieved by providing funding to the recreational fishing groups and conservation organizations like the OFAH to undertake projects that support these objectives. Infrastructure investments into more boat launches and better parking and boat washing stations will lend itself directly to engaging Canadians with the outdoors, creating lasting, meaningful connections to nature, as well as having positive economic outcomes. So the OFAH has established its own student research grant program that we're piloting this year, and where longer-term funding arrangements will be provided to students to complete their graduate work on fish and wildlife related research projects. And in 2022, we also established our Community Conservation Fund to support various initiatives, including fish and wildlife conservation projects, habitat restoration and protection, as well as invasive species mitigation. So on a nationwide scale, the Canada Water Agency should seek out opportunities in a similar way by investing in research related to recreational fisheries, creating funding mechanisms to support grassroots community actions, and engaging Canadians in prevention and management of aquatic invasive species. Fish and fishing are tangible. It's something that most Canadians can relate to. It fosters a healthy lifestyle and appreciation for nature and the outdoors, and a sense of stewardship towards the land as well as the water. So we look forward to working with the federal government and the Canada Water Agency to find the best ways to keep our water safe, clean, and well managed by prioritizing Canada's recreational fisheries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll turn now to, I guess it would be Ms. Nelson of the Rivershed Society of British Columbia. I assume you will be presenting.
Justine and I will be splitting the time
Okay, go ahead.
today.
Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity to participate in this important study on freshwater. I'm joining you today from the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples in Vancouver, British Columbia. My name is Mickey Eslake. I'm a program coordinator with the Rivershed Society of BC, and I'm here today with Rivershed's Executive Director, Justine Nelson. Rivershed was founded in 1996 by Finn Donnelly after he swam the entire length of the Fraser River. He did this to raise awareness of the critical role that the Fraser plays in supporting salmon, people, and the economy. We have an ambitious vision to see the Fraser as a resilient watershed with salmon, people, and economies flourishing in Rivershed communities. The Fraser is truly the heart and soul of British Columbia. Its watershed is the cornerstone of our ecological, cultural, and economic vitality, but it faces significant challenges. One of those challenges is the alarming decline of returning salmon to the Fraser. Historically, 50 million sockeye return to the Fraser every year. In 2022, despite it being a dominant year, only 5.5 million returned. Salmon are both key elements of a healthy watershed and key indicators of it, so it's important to take this decline seriously. The climate crisis is a water crisis, and the health of our watersheds plays a critical role in providing natural defenses against climate change impacts, including droughts, wildfires, and floods. To effectively advance the freshwater agenda in Canada, the government must uphold its commitment to invest $1 billion in the Freshwater Action Plan. This investment must support watersheds like the Fraser and prioritize actions in collaboration with Indigenous peoples. The Fraser is listed by the government as a priority watershed, but allocated funds under the Freshwater Action Plan have been disproportionately spent elsewhere, leaving the Fraser watershed underfunded and vulnerable. Communities here are still grappling with the aftermath of the devastating 2023 wildfire season. Many parts of the watershed are still experiencing severe drought conditions, and in some cases are also now under flood watch at the same time. Rivershed's board member from the Nechako region, Wayne Saluski, has stressed that ongoing drought combined with devastating wildfires have dried out critically important salmon streams across the region that are crucial to salmon recovery efforts. We know that these extreme weather events are not anomalies and can be expected to happen more frequently with climate change. And I'll pass the rest of the time over to Justine.
Thank you, Mickey. Rivershed actively participates in the BC Watershed Security Coalition, advocating for a BC Watershed Security Fund. The province of BC and the First Nations Water Table announced the co-development of the BC Watershed Security Strategy and Fund in March of 2023, with an initial investment of $100 million. This was a great start, but a $100 million endowment fund will only generate $5 million a year for projects. That is a far cry from what is needed to safeguard BC's watersheds. It needs to be at least 10 times larger. The BC Watershed Security Fund needs substantial federal support to reach its full potential and adequately address challenges faced by watersheds in BC, including the Fraser. We are asking this committee to recommend the Government of Canada invest $400 million in the BC Watershed Security Fund and fulfill their commitment to make a historic investment of $100 billion in the Freshwater Action Plan. These investments could help address immediate challenges, all while advancing climate mitigation, reconciliation, and sustainable economic development. Allocating funds after disasters happen to deal with the immediate aftermath is no longer sufficient. It's imperative to proactively address the root causes before our watersheds experience levels of drought and habitat loss that they cannot recover from. This is still possible in the Fraser watershed. The BC Watershed Security Fund presents an opportunity to proactively address disasters and break the cycle of merely responding to them. It will allow us to get ahead of crises and invest in resilience and prevention. The Fraser watershed underscores the urgency of this shift and a move from reactive to proactive, safeguarding our ecosystems, communities, and economies for the long term. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Mr. Leslie to kick off the 6-minute round.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Weir. I understand that recreational fisheries actually contribute more to Canada's GDP than our commercial fishery, obviously providing a lot of tourism dollars in rural communities across Canada. So I'd like you to elaborate on what is the biggest challenge facing our recreational fisheries at this point in time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's unfortunately many challenges, like we just discussed in terms of aquatic habitat, and declines in quality and health of aquatic habitat are obviously major ones, but some of the key themes in my presentation earlier really focused in on aquatic invasive species and looking at prevention and early detection, dams and barriers, and just providing for better habitat connectivity is obviously a big one too. And in general, research and monitoring and looking at other stressors related to fish habitat as well.
Thank you, Mr. Weir. And you did make mention of the Recreational Fisheries Conservation Partnership Program, which was spearheaded by former Conservative MP Robert Sopak, a great Canadian, which would have dramatically improved freshwater quality, which did dramatically improve freshwater quality in a number of lakes and water bodies across Canada, including my home province of Manitoba. And now, even though this program was incredibly successful by every metric, for some reason or another, new government came in post-2015 and decided to cut this program. So I'm just curious, were you ever explained to, as an organization, why that program was discontinued and cut by this government?
Wasn't explained why it was cut, but it was definitely a benefit for our own Lake Ontario Atlantic Salmon Restoration Program. And it benefited a number of different angling groups, conservation organizations, including Indigenous communities as well.
So obviously, the impact of that cut was that you and many other organizations you mentioned weren't able to proceed with cold water refugia or whatever sort of project to enable enhanced fish habitat as planned. What has the impact been on organizations like yourself in terms of that boots in the water, actual enhancements to our fisheries, and do you recommend that the government reinstate a program of that nature?
Yeah, it definitely had an impact, and when you look not just Ontario and where we're based, it's Canada-wide, we have massive declines, like I mentioned, in aquatic habitat, health and quality. So to reinstate something like that, especially providing to grassroots community initiatives and giving the shovel in the hands of the people that are on the land, it's extremely meaningful, and it has extremely meaningful direct connections to nature, the outdoors, aquatic habitats, and Canadians in general as well.
Could you expand on like these projects on the ground? I know you have a lot of volunteers that do it, but it costs money. What is the impact that could be seen from bringing that program back or a program of that nature? Like it's tough to quantify, I know, but this is meaningful. This is real environmentalism.
Yeah, I think in terms of actual numbers, that is difficult to quantify. We have 1.4 million licensed anglers in Ontario alone who contribute $2.2 billion annually. Across Canada, 3 million that contribute in upwards of $19 billion annually to the economy. So it's huge in terms of what anglers are spending, and also in terms of what you get out of investing in fish and fish habitat. It's huge, almost something that you can't measure.
Yeah. So one of the other cuts that was made, it was a little bit later, it was made in 2019, was the Wetland Conservation Program, which helped provide funding to projects to restore and rehabilitate important wetlands that help hold water in times of floods, allowing it for availability in times of drought, and obviously improving water quality overall. So just a broad-based question outside of the program, although you can comment on whether or not the program would be valuable to bring back. How important would you say wetlands are to our overall ecosystem, and why should government be maintaining the ability to work with groups like yourselves and others across the country to protect them?
Incredibly important, known as nature's sponge. Just also in terms of biodiversity, the importance of wetlands, it cannot be overstated. And that's just not coming from my background as a fisheries biologist, but on multiple levels across the board, you would be looking at serious importance that wetlands provide to fish, wildlife, humans, Canadians, all of the above.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Canada Water Agency and kind of dove into some of that in your testimony. What do you feel that the federal government's role and jurisdiction should be in supporting the recreational fisheries as it applies to that? What role should the Canadian Water Agency have in that, in recognizing that you're a provincial-based organization? And do you have any specific ideas that, whether through the Canadian Water Agency or programs external to that, the government should be considering that we can add to our report to make sure that we're actually providing the support that groups like yours need?
Yeah, another really good question. Just, I think there's multiple levels there, and obviously funding is going to be a huge one, providing funding to boots on the ground, grassroots community organizations, and CNGOs as well. Some of the other themes that I've heard come out through the discussions here, just looking at harmonizing things across the board, accountability, having a watchdog, having better intergovernmental collaboration, and this is at multiple levels too, not just within federal agencies, but with provincial agencies as well, and maybe that could have a trickle-down effect as well to municipalities too, and just finding a common ground approach where we can take all the moving parts and make it somewhat simpler.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Mr. Ali now, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for appearing today to share your knowledge and experience with us. My first questions are for Mr. Schreier and Mr. Weir. Water plays a crucial role in our ecosystems, and without clean water, habitats can be altered not just for humans, but for other species as well. And water policy can also play a role in protecting against invasive species such as zebra mussels. What measures does the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters believe that federal government can take in protecting our water from invasive species? And once discovered, what measures does the federal government have to protect our water resources from invasive species?
My partner here, he's the invasive species expert, so I'll pass it over to Brooke.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having us. I think the federal government has a key role to play in protecting our aquatic ecosystems from aquatic invasive species and terrestrial invasive species. In terms of fresh waters, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, which is our federal entity, sets out their goals are to prevent introductions of AIS. They are to respond rapidly to new AIS that are detected, and as well as manage the spread of present AIS. Aquatic invasive species and terrestrial invasive species have extremely detrimental impacts across the country. The Environment and Climate Change Canada had estimated that 16 invasive species cost us anywhere between $13 to $39 billion annually. That's a huge number of taxpayers' dollars, and it's felt across the board in terms of management, response, impacts to property values, impacts to ecosystems, ecosystem services, native species, you name it. So that's what we need from the federal government. They need to be funding programs such as the DFO AIS program, which only receives approximately $10 million a year. And that AIS core program is responsible for these species that are having, in the tens to 30s billions of dollars of impacts every single year. So it's very fundamental that we fund this type of work, especially at the federal level.
Thank you. Ms. Patron and Ms. Roy Gregor, thank you for your time and being here today. Can you tell us about the importance of climate adaptation when it comes to protecting our water resources?
It's very important because climate change generates an increase in the consumption of water throughout industry and urban centers as well, but it also affects the climate. The cloud cover that we have each winter and the snow we have each winter. It also can promote the acceleration of the evaporation cycle. Given the quantity of water that is available, there might be a downturn. And in certain regions in Canada, in Quebec, there have been drastic drops. There have been almost floods of water. The rainfall has been reaching very high levels in a single day. So what I can say is that you have to be careful how you manage the water supply, because that can lead to conflict. In dry areas, there might be a conflict over how available water is used. You have to prevent. You have to look to the future. You have to say, how can we prevent problems in water use in the future?
Thank you, Professors Clark and Petrano. Sorry, my apology for pronunciation. Thank you for being here today. Can you tell us more about what your academic work on water focused on?
I'm sorry, Mr. Ali, you broke up when you were speaking. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, can you tell us more about what your academic work on water focused on?
Sure, I can start and let Dr. Clark continue. So we focus mostly on environmental prediction systems, right? And a lot of our focus here at the University of Calgary, but with our colleagues across Canada, is on improving prediction systems, right? And so I think you're aware that in the provinces and territories and at the federal level, there's many prediction activities that go on, right? And so what we try to do is consolidate, the mathematical modeling, the approaches that we take, and work with provinces and territories and the federal government, develop improved prediction systems, both at the climate scale, but also at the forecasting scale, because we have to predict at all kinds of scales, right, in terms of time. And so that's what our research focuses on, and I'll let Dr. Clark continue that discussion.
You only have about 15 seconds, Dr. Clark, but you'll be able to address this in answer to questions later on.
Yes, okay, I'll go very, very quickly. In addition to what Dr. Petronero said, we're doing a lot of work with the United States as part of their Cooperative Institute to Research to Operations in Hydrology. That's a new $360 million cooperative institute to focus on water resources prediction.
Thank you. Madame Posé, la parole est à vous.
Madame Posé, you have the floor. Welcome to our witnesses, particularly those people who have traveled to come here. You put in some miles to come and be with us this morning, or this afternoon. Madame Petrin, you have said that you work with other advocacy groups for citizens. Can you tell us a little bit about the Forum for Action in Quebec with respect to conserving water? Can you expand on that? The goal of this advocacy group is to do what we are doing today. That represents, if you like, the various spheres of society and the municipalities. We have representatives from the concerned departments as well. We have agricultural producers, farmers who are part of it. We have representatives of the forestry industry, the chambers of commerce. There are 4 representatives from civil society who speak on behalf of citizens. And the fisheries are represented. And there is also a representative that deals specifically with salmon. Meetings are held every 2 months. And we talk about how we will use the new Fonds Bleu, the Blue Fund that has been given by the provincial government. And also we discuss the priorities that will apply with respect to water governance throughout the province. There are people who have come to us to speak about the forum, about invasive species, particularly in terms of the watershed. Does that happen in Quebec? We do have this. We try to bring all the players in the territory to discuss what is happening in this area. Water is multi-sectoral. We want to know what are the priority directions that we have to look to. What can we do to harmonize our action plans? Because, if everybody acts on their own, we will not have concrete results. You said earlier that you referred to conflicts in the use of water, heritage, but we also that there can be a negative effect on the water, on fresh water with urban development. Now, either you have legislation that is passed or else sometimes it is not applied. What do you say to this? We have made many representations to the government of Quebec with respect to the use of water in Quebec. We have been provided with data in our representations. We want to be able to demonstrate what is the quantity of water that is most easily quantified. If we have dry periods, increasing dry periods in Canada, there will be drought. We want to be able to move up the watershed to identify who are the greatest users of water and what they do with it. And those cities that are downstream of, is there contamination in the water? you are opening the door for me to speak to the matter of Chalk River, which is a depository of water. As you know, there is a uranium installation that is very, very close to the waterways that exist there, and that water is used by millions of people in Quebec and elsewhere. There is perhaps a possibility of flooding. There is a possibility of contamination. There is also a possibility that the people will be affected by consuming bad water. Can you speak to that? That has been a concern of us for a very long time. There are 3 million people living around Lac de Montagne and other waterways and the St. Lawrence. You know, the Ottawa River, we feel, has no plan available if there is a flooding that would suffice to meet the problems that would be brought about by the flooding itself. And the Chalk River depository is the worst to our mind because there is the possibility of contamination. You know that contamination by these radioactive materials, if ever that were to occur, would be irreversible, totally irreversible. And so we have looked at alternative scenarios, but we feel that there has to be a better scenario developed for the good of Canada. You talk about political representation in the public square. I know, with respect to Chalk River, that elected representatives do not always take up their responsibilities. They are not always accountable with respect to the decisions that are made. What do you say to that? Well, organizations like ours participate in the democratic system in Canada, and there's funding for our participation. But, for example, Transport Canada, with respect to the nuclear safety parks, there is, I'm sorry to interrupt, but thank you. It's a very good point, but you're talking about something very important, Madam Cullinan.
And thank you to all the witnesses for coming today. We appreciate your testimony. My first questions are for Ms. Nelson, and as a member of Parliament from British Columbia, we have witnessed extreme flooding, droughts, wildfires, atmospheric rivers, heat domes that have resulted in the tragic loss of hundreds of lives. Right now in BC, there are areas that have been experiencing multi-year droughts and other areas that are being evacuated for flooding simultaneously. So can you tell us a little bit more about some of the initiatives that you had mentioned when it comes to prevention and building resilience?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So as mentioned, we're engaged with the BC Watershed Security Coalition, which is working to create a sustainable watershed security fund, because healthy, resilient watersheds mean clean drinking water, thriving fish populations, and strong local economies. You will actually be hearing from the coalition directly in the next hour of the meeting. But two programs of Rivershed that respond to climate and other impacts in the Fraser are our Foodlands program and the Watershed CPR dashboard. So our Foodlands program fosters ecosystem health and strengthens climate resilience through collaborative efforts within the Fraser watershed. It brings together First Nation communities, agricultural landholders, and other stakeholders to create restored corridors on privately held lands throughout the Fraser watershed. This collaborative approach integrates traditional knowledge and language, emphasizing the importance of First Nation stewardship in habitat restoration and resilience building. Our other project, the Watershed CPR Dashboard, visually represents protection and restoration efforts across the Fraser watershed. It facilitates collaboration among stakeholders, amplifies resilience building efforts, and encourages public support and capital investments for a resilient Fraser watershed. Both of these programs foster ecosystem health, support stewardship efforts, and build community resilience in response to climate change impacts. But there are only two programs amongst many that are happening across the watershed and throughout BC that are working on preventative measures here. Thank you.
And we know that watershed governance is, it's municipal, it's regional, it is provincial, it's federal. It's also, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis governance. Has jurisdiction over water as well. Can you talk a little bit about how the work you do intersects with all of those and what you see as a path forward to make sure that we are having coherence in our watershed policies?
Yeah, so we work to bring people together. That's really what our position as a nonprofit is. So through programs like Foodlands and the Watershed CPR Dashboard, we're working to bring people together, working towards protection and restoration efforts. So while we do have programs that are directly implementing restoration, most of the actual on-the-ground work is actually happening by other collaborators. And so that's really what we say our role as is the people that connect everyone to work towards these efforts. And I think that's really important when you're working towards something of such a large scale with so many diverse actors, as you've mentioned.
Thanks so much. And I'm curious and I'd love to hear from both of you from Riversheds BC. What are some essential components that you're wanting to see that would make the Canada Water Agency successful and that would make the Canada Water Act more effective at protecting our watersheds?
Yeah, so as a nonprofit working throughout such a large watershed, and as you mentioned, we know the responsibility for fresh water is shared between so many levels of government. Federally, there are more than 20 departments and agencies with responsibility for fresh water, which makes it really difficult to get to the bottom of an issue, especially for a small nonprofit. So we really support the idea of effective coordination through an agency like the Canada Water Agency. However, we really believe it must be done in collaboration with First Nations.
Thanks so much. And maybe for my last question of this round, I'll ask Mr. Weir and Mr. Shar, just in terms of the impacts of the climate crisis on anglers, on fish stocks, but also on invasive species. What have you been seeing?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a difficult one to answer. There are a lot of uncertainties and unknowns with respect to climate change, but for the most part, I on a personal and professional level, don't see a lot of good things happening, especially to cold water sensitive, more vulnerable fish species come to mind. And we're seeing it now. There are a lot of good studies out there, particularly in Ontario and Algonquin Provincial Park. The climate change, it trends internationally, and on a smaller scale, the trends are the same that we see in Algonquin Provincial Park too. And you look at again, brook trout and lake trout populations that are at risk there. It's a major threat. And then in terms of aquatic invasive species, there's obviously some concerns there too. So Brooke.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. In terms of aquatic invasive species, what we've seen historically is with our colder climate, we've been able to keep various species at bay. Their climatic tolerances haven't been able to withstand our colder temperatures. But with climate change, we're seeing species being able to overwinter, which we did not see historically. Just this winter, we were hoping for a cold winter to potentially eradicate a new species which was discovered for the first time in North America, in Ontario. That's the marbled crayfish, which is a species which was first discovered in Germany and actually reproduces asexually and will have devastating impacts on our native crayfish species, fresh fisheries, as well as many other impacts.
Thank you. We'll have to stop there. It does sound fascinating, but we'll have to stop there, and we'll go to the second round. To ensure we make a good time, I'm reducing the questioning by 40%. So, Mr. Deltel, you have 3 minutes on this round.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. My questions are for Madame Pétrin, Madame Grégoire. It was very interesting for me to listen to your testimony today. I note that you spoke to the catastrophe that's occurring at Kanesatake. I wish them courage and dignity in this very troubling situation for the community. It's not an Indigenous question, it's a question of public health, and we are all very aware of it. In your presentation, You said the province says it's not my business. The federal government says it's not my business. They're passing the buck. Can you give me an example that inspires you of governance that would be federal, provincial, and municipal in nature where it works? Well, is this a trick question? Yeah, there are several models, as you know, and we do see this between the provincial government and the municipalities because they often work together. In Quebec, we saw the adoption of the Quebec strategy for drinking water, which is one that we have worked on a great deal. First of all, it is the responsibility of the municipalities to put that strategy in place, and the provinces support all the users. There were action plans that were deployed, and it was a strategy that worked harmoniously in cooperation with all the stakeholders, and it's really going quite well. We've been working for some 2 years with the government and the municipalities on this project. It has led to green infrastructure projects in the sewer system, and also it's been good for the municipalities because they've been able to mount a public structure to lessen the loss of water from aqueducts. So as long as the two level of governments target the same goal and the funding is there, it's good. So that's local, that's water, local water. But it is the use, the local use of the water that you're talking about. After that, you move towards the provinces and then the broader framework. We know how it's working in Quebec, but geographically it could be different. What would be the role, to your mind, of the federal government to involve very, very quickly, please? Clear and precise goals for all of Canada that could be followed by the provinces with a good follow-up. Mr. Longfield, 3 minutes.
All the witnesses, I'm going to direct my questions to Dr. Clark and Dr. Pietronero. When we look at the modeling, something that the Canada Water Agency, as you mentioned, could be involved with, looking at Calgary in particular, getting water from the Bull River, which is relying on glaciers and which are receding. We have droughts in southern Alberta. We have the North and South Saskatchewan River going into Lake Manitoba and Lake Winnipeg, which then have hydroelectric dams, which also need water. So we need water on the prairies for food. We need it for municipalities. We need water for hydroelectricity. All of that is really under threat. When we look at water itself, we've got the surface water, either flowing or standing. We're familiar with lakes and rivers and streams. We also have groundwater, where Guelph draws its water from below that we don't see, and we also have atmospheric water. So when you're modeling and looking at the changes in atmosphere and the clouds and rainfall patterns, it's a really complicated situation that we've got here. It's not just rivers and streams. Could you comment on the complexity and the need for science across Canada to be connected on this, as well as international science?
Yeah, maybe I can start. Thank you. That's a very good question. You're absolutely right. The complexity is enormous, and the complexity that we have to deal with, especially in a changing climate, makes it really impossible for a single modelling group to make substantial progress on the problem. So what we're seeing across Canada is that the only way that we can develop the next generation of prediction capabilities that are needed is to pool resources, is to combine resources, is to build our models so that different groups are interoperable with each other so that we can really address the challenges at hand. That includes, collaboration across the provinces and territories, the federal government with academia, with the private sector, and then also internationally. It's a very big challenge. Let Dr. Pietronero add to that as well.
And just to be clear, what we're proposing here is really a national framework to bring the academic communities, the provinces, territories, and the federal government, and even municipalities all together, and the private sector, to develop systems that that can be applied for any jurisdiction, right? And so it's really a national approach. Thank you.
And I hope we're including traditional knowledge from Indigenous sources as well in those discussions.
Yes, and in the briefing you'll see that.
Thank you. I wish I had more time, but I don't.
Much up.
Over to you, Chair.
Madame Posé, vous disposez d'une minute.
Minute and a half, Madame Posé. That's not a lot, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to come back to Chalk River because that's something that is of great concern to me. As a Montrealer in particular, I could be drinking contaminated water. If this is a project that is approved by the Liberal government, whereas Montreal, Gatineau, and elsewhere, all the mayors of the region have said that they were against the project, how then can you explain that not only municipalities but also Indigenous groups, how can you explain that the government is moving ahead with a nuclear depository in Chalk River? Clearly, there wasn't enough there haven't been enough rights attached to the waterways in Quebec. And there is such a huge risk of pollution in these waterways. There's some protection from nature, but I just cannot find an answer. I can't explain it. When you talk about rights and protecting rights, we talked about it on Tuesday's committee meeting. There are international rights. There are rights everywhere, but you see what's happening, that you have rights, but if there are no obligations and no penalties attached to those rights, nothing happens. So what can we do? Very quickly, I think that that society should reject that project. It should ask the government of Canada to withdraw its project for the health of all Canadians.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just again to Riversheds BC, one of the things you mentioned in your opening statement was that the funding was disproportionately spent elsewhere than British Columbia. Given the impacts on watersheds from our changing climate that BC has seen, could you talk a little bit about the need for increased funding, the need for BC to get its fair share of the funding that is being allocated?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the BC Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund is a really good example of that. So the recent opened application period for $250 million fund had more than $1 billion in applications. And of those applications, more than 60% were for restoration projects. So I think that clearly demonstrates the need for funding within BC for this sort of work. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And you talked a little bit about the need for collaboration with Indigenous communities. Can you speak more to what the federal government could be doing to support organizations like yours to make sure that there is collaboration with Indigenous peoples on these issues?
I think one of the biggest things is that when there are funding opportunities, providing funding for relationship building in these sorts of situations, relationship building takes time, and a lot of the times funding sources do not allow for that sort of deep relationship building to happen. And so when we're looking at collaboration, that's desperately needed.
Thank you. Mr. Cram for 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So I don't have a lot of time, so I'll try and just go, I'll cut to the chase right away. To the witnesses from the University of Calgary, you talked about a fragmented prediction landscape for floods in this country and the need for a Canadian Institute for Environmental Predictions. So could you explain for the committee who is doing the predictions now in this country for flood predictions in this fragmented landscape?
Sure, I can take that question. So right now, it's largely the responsibility of the provincial governments. Some municipal governments also do flood forecasting. And there's a national flood guidance system that's been recently developed by ECCC. And all those agencies are talking together and things are moving forward. Where we think we can make more advancement is really on the research to operations side. And so the whole idea of this cooperative institute is to allow an ecosystem for research that allows interoperability between systems and allows people to take advantage of things like AI and so that the provinces can, make their systems better at the federal level. They can make their systems better in the municipalities as well, and it's all a shared platform. Is that?
And
Martin, did you want to add? Go ahead. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. And so did you have in mind for the Canadian Institute of Environmental Predictions, is this going to be in addition to these 10 provincial bodies that are doing these predictions, or would the need for the 10 provincial bodies go away?
No, the idea here is to maintain the jurisdiction. This is a research to operations paradigm, so it's a way to get research. I think it's important to understand that all of these agencies that are doing, whether it's flood prediction or water supply predictions, are always very busy, and to actually undertake research to make their systems better is often very difficult, and it becomes fragmented. And so the idea here is to really try to bring it all together into a national cohesive system, but every province would run their own forecasting system. The federal government and ECC would continue doing the same things.
So I'm going to assume that the $50 million that you mentioned in your opening statement, that would be new money then? And if so, could you maybe give us an idea of what the new money would be used for?
So the focus, and I'll let Dr. Clark speak to this a little bit, the focus would be on new money, but perhaps reprofiling existing money as well. There's lots of grants and contributions around the country that are being used now to update systems, right? And so there's a possibility to reprofile existing money and then add some new money in the system. And part of the motivation here is because we're kind of dealing with a bit of a crisis right now with climate change and with all what we're seeing with wildfires and floods and droughts.
Merci,
and so
merci.
The idea is to accelerate things.
Merci. On va terminer avec Madame Châtel pour 3.
Madame Châtel, 3 minutes. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask a question of Madame Pétrin, but thank you for being here. I have questions as well about Chalk River. Clearly, my riding is on the Quebec side, but right opposite Chalk River. So I do share your frustration in terms of a lack of alternatives. Yes, there were independent conditions. We heard experts coming from all over Canada in the hearings, and then the Commission gave its decision, its ruling. It was the only project, but we really didn't have the opportunity to consult to see if there were some alternatives that might be better, more adequate. So, you have the river there, but there's also the underground water that is there that could be connecting. The concern in my riding is that there is a waste already. We are there on the bank of the river in my riding, and there are buildings that contain nuclear waste, and that's going to have to be demolished. And the waste that I'm talking about are going to have to be stored elsewhere in a secure manner. So what's going to happen? Are they going to leave that waste there that is so vulnerable in terms of forest fires and earthquakes, or is it not going to be left there? We have to, in terms of moving ahead with this project, I know that there is a membrane that protects it at present, but it's not a permanent situation to leave the waste on the riverbank. And that is really what is of concern to the people. Yes, we understand. I can't substitute my thought for the experts who spoke to this matter. I'm not a specialist in this, but there is one thing for sure. We've followed citizen groups and also experts who dealt with this project. From the very outset, they were saying, couldn't there be a different scenario, other scenarios different from this? We had to accept what was there, but the people were already very much aware of the lack of alternative solutions for this. That is perhaps the way that the Nuclear Safety Commission operates, because as you have said, that initial evaluation was authorized, but how can that be that there wouldn't be other alternatives? Many things from the outset did not find any solution. Thank you. And thank you. That brings us to the end of our first panel of the first hour. I want to thank our panelists who have been here with us this afternoon and also those who are listening online. We'll take a very brief pause now to welcome our second panel. Thank you for spending time with us. It was very interesting.
We're back in business here. We're back in business, and we have with us Dr. John Pomeroy, a distinguished professor and Canada Research Chair in Water Resources and Climate Change. And we have from the BC Watershed Security Coalition, Corey Tull, co-chair, and from the Canadian Nuclear Association, Jill Baker and Soroush Mirmiran, and from the Fédération de l'UPA, Outaouais-Laurentides, Marie-Josée Mézot. Alors, sans plus tarder, on va demander
Without any further ado, we'll ask Dr. Pomeroy to make his presentation.
Thank you very much, Merci beaucoup. It's an honor to be here as a University of Saskatchewan professor who does his work on Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 lands in the home of the Métis, so we honor them. I'm here representing the knowledge of over 200 professors at 23 universities across Canada, over 500 collaborators, and over 2,000 researchers and students who are finding solutions to water problems through their work in the Global Water Futures Program, a federally funded study, the largest in the world, led by universities, and the most scientifically productive in the world, and it's in Canada. So this is funded by the Canada First Research Excellence Fund. It is wrapping up right now. We are carrying on the observations of this with the Global Water Futures Observatories project, funded by partially by the Canada Foundation for Innovation. I want to note the contributions to modeling that Professors Clark and Pietranero made. They're key leads in the modeling program of the Global Water Futures Program and made tremendous advances that are being used around the world in water and environmental prediction. I want to talk a bit about history. I was an Environment Canada scientist in the previous century, and in 1996, I was asked to work with other scientists in the department to summarize the impacts of climate change on water, fresh water in Canada, exactly the question I've been asked to address here. I found my slides the other day. They're kind of old-fashioned, and everything we mentioned in there had not happened yet, and everything we mentioned in there is happening. The floods, the droughts being worse, the loss of glaciers, the loss of snowpack, lake ice, algae blooms, water contamination, other problems. We're seeing it all. I guess the lesson from that is science can be helpful. Over 25 years ago, there was a good appreciation of what was coming if we didn't take action. But now we have to take action. 2023 was the hottest year in the planet since instrumented records began, and possibly in 120,000 years, which is most of humanity's history. In Canada, this melted snow and ice, thawed permafrost, burned our forest, and intensified the flow of water through the landscape. Floods were worse, droughts were worse, outside of which the species in our country and our natural environment have ever evolved. This is hurtling us into a dangerous and unfamiliar world where our experience and traditional approaches are no longer provide adequate guidance. Canada has an unprecedented number of water-related disasters. By my estimates, they've exceeded $40 billion in costs since the turn of the century. And those, even worse, I say those water disasters have broken the trust that Canadians once had with their governments to manage their water competently. There is international concern about these changes. The United Nations has instituted an International Year for Glaciers Preservation, which looks at the loss of snow and ice around the world. And this is, of course, defining for Canadian water. In 2023, the snow drought was the prompt to the wildfires, the prairie drought, the hydroelectric shortages, now the depleted groundwater, and the restricted water for municipalities that has been endemic across the country. It's from BC to Labrador, from the prairies up into the Arctic. The drought situation this year is looking dire. From the observation stations that I operate in the Canadian Rockies, we have a snowpack at 70% of normal. Last year we had record glacier melt. Our groundwater levels are at record low levels right now. Water reservoirs in the Rockies are 5 meters below where they should be this time of year, and some reservoirs so low that municipalities can't withdraw water through their pipes and have to get water trucked in southern Alberta. Lake Diefenbaker in southern Saskatchewan, which provides water for 70% of the population, received only 28% of its normal inflows last year, something absolutely unprecedented. So we need to pick up our game on fresh water. We need leadership on how dealing with these climate change and drought impacts. And here's a list of things to consider. We need national coordination, new investment in novel technologies such as the environmental prediction mentioned to help predict with floods, water quality, and droughts, identify properties and infrastructure at risk in the future. We need to identify the vulnerabilities of communities and focus on mitigating vulnerability, not just flood damages. It's not just money, it's people's lives. We need to integrate our planning on river basins, something we don't do in this country, to help for disaster mitigation, adaptation, flood and drought recovery, pollution abatement, transboundary allocations, our American water relationships, and the use of natural infrastructure such as lakes, wetlands, and forests. We need the leading-edge research and science capacity to inform wise water decisions and build state-of-the-art water prediction and management systems to support our decision-making so we know in advance what's going to be happening.
Thank you. We're going to have to stop there, but there'll be many questions, I'm sure, and you'll be able to get more information into the discussion. We'll go to Ms. Tull, please, for 5 minutes.
Hello, bonjour, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today as we discuss the freshwater study in the face of climate change. My name is Corey Tull. I'm the co-chair of the BC Watershed Security Coalition. We're a nonpartisan coalition representing 50 organizations and 255,000 British Columbians from all corners of the province. Across Canada, healthy watersheds are vital to human health, security, prosperity, and reconciliation. Today, I join you from the China Creek urban watershed situated on the unceded traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Coast Salish people. The climate crisis is a water crisis. From coast to coast to coast, communities are on the front line of a relentless cycle of climate disasters. From droughts to fires to floods, climate change demands urgent attention, action, and leadership to get ahead of these crises. The rivers and lakes of British Columbia are essential to our local economies, the production of food, clean drinking water, wild salmon, and the practice of Indigenous rights and culture. Watersheds are nature's infrastructure. However, BC's watersheds have been weakened by the impact of human activities on the land, which has left us much more vulnerable to the climate-fueled floods, droughts, and fires that we're seeing. Currently, BC is experiencing a multi-year drought. This has been characterized as a sleeping giant disaster by the BC Minister of Emergency Management. Communities in every corner of the province were impacted by the drought and subsequent wildfires this past summer. With 8 river basins still in stage 4 or 5 drought, that means adverse impacts to socioeconomic or ecosystem values are likely or almost certain. The province's climate risk assessment estimates economic losses will exceed $1 billion annually from long-term water shortages. January has exhibited unusually warm weather across the province, marked by minimal rainfall in certain regions and excessive precipitation that would typically occur as snow in others. So this is being seen in parts of southern BC right now with rising flood threats and local states of emergency. And the current winter snowpack averaging about 56% here for the province due to this low snowfall is signaling another hard year of floods, droughts, and wildfires with even greater impacts than we've seen to this date. So for the second year in a row, Canada has exceeded the $3 billion mark in insured damages from natural disasters. Climate costs will continue to escalate unless we change our approach. The International Institute for Sustainable Development notes that natural infrastructure like forests and wetlands, which are a critical feature of our watersheds, offer services at a lower cost than traditional built infrastructure. And these natural defenses are not only cheaper to build, but also more cost effective to maintain, and they appreciate over time. The Canadian Climate Institute estimates that each dollar spent on adaptation measures can save $13 to $15, factoring in both direct and indirect economic-wide benefits. So there are no more excuses. Climate change is here. We must make an urgent shift from reactive crisis management to proactive investment. British Columbians and all Canadians need to see bold and decisive action from their federal government. They need to see investments in the security of their watersheds as essential infrastructure that will keep their communities safe. Today, I'm asking the committee to recommend in your final report that the federal government invest $400 million in the BC Watershed Security Fund, which is being co-developed with First Nations. This investment is crucial to ensure long-term impacts on the ground and support collaborative partnerships for better decision-making. It also demonstrates a new way of working with First Nations that can be a model for the rest of the country. I also ask that you recommend the federal government fulfill their commitment to invest $1 billion in the Freshwater Action Plan. Federal reporting demonstrates a long-standing disparity in investment in freshwater, with British Columbia receiving zero direct funding under various freshwater action plans in the last 2 decades. This discrepancy was underscored by the recent funding announcement under the Freshwater Action Plan, which again left BC off the list of funding priorities. It is time to address these regional inequities. Healthy watersheds not only reduce risks to community health and security, they also mitigate climate impacts on economic sectors like agriculture, freshwater, tourism, breweries, pulp and paper, and oil and gas. In addition, investing in freshwater and watersheds creates vital local employment opportunities with local economic benefits. Recent economic studies show that BC's watershed sector sustains over 47,000 jobs and contributes $5 billion to GDP through watershed work such as restoration, monitoring, technology, and urban and industrial water management. I commend this committee for studying such a crucial matter. Prioritizing and making these critical investments will build resilience in communities and proactively get ahead of disasters before they happen. I look forward to continuing this conversation with you and answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
Ms. Tull will go to, I guess it's Jill Baker from the Canadian Nuclear Association.
All right, thank you, Chair and members of the committee for your invitation to appear and speak today. I'd like to recognize I'm working today on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. My name is Jill Baker, and I'm the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Policy at the Canadian Nuclear Association, also known as CNA. With me today is our Regulatory Affairs Director, Sarush Miraman, who will be joining the discussion, if necessary, during the Q&A portion of the meeting today. Just so you know, the CNA represents the clean nuclear energy companies who are responsible for nuclear energy production, mostly in Ontario and New Brunswick, as well as the supply chain that supports the industry. We have approximately 100 members from across Canada. We also represent the Canadian uranium fuel cycle, including both world-class and state-of-the-art uranium producers in Saskatchewan, as well as processing and fuel fabrication facilities in Ontario. The association also represents industries who produce and use important nuclear substances for industrial purposes across Canada, as well as the production and use of life-saving medical isotopes. Our association aims to promote Canada's worldwide leadership in both nuclear science and technology innovations. Currently, the industry employs over 76,000 direct and indirect jobs across the sector in Canada, and this is growing. So now to the topic of, we want to take the opportunity today to draw your attention to the importance of the nuclear sector and climate change, and to let you know what our position is at a very high level on the importance of water. So the study of fresh water and the impacts of climate change on this important resource being undertaken by the committee is both very timely and important. The sustainable protection of Canada's freshwater resources is a duty shared by all of us, individuals, governments, and associations such as ourselves. Our members are committed to the health of the public and the protection of the environment, including the sustainable protection of fresh waters in the face of climate change and stresses on the environment which it imposes. Today, I would like to very briefly share with you where the nuclear industry and the members of the CNA stand on freshwater and sustainability. The Canadian nuclear industry is federally regulated by our life cycle regulator, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, also by Fisheries and Oceans Canada, as well as by Environment and Climate Change Canada. We commit to excellence by meeting or exceeding all relevant legal requirements to which we subscribe. We hold ourselves accountable to prevent pollution through the robust management of emissions and effluents. The industry's commitment to environmental protection includes the application of sustainability principles and includes Indigenous communities' participation and engagement. Nuclear energy plays a critical role on our path to net zero to fight climate change, both domestically and internationally around the world. At COP28 last December, nuclear energy was recognized for its key role in reaching net zero by both the US, Canada, and multiple other countries. Nuclear energy is recognized by this federal government as a part of the pathway to net zero in Canada, and we must do what we can to ensure that Canada demonstrates leadership towards this pathway. Furthermore, nuclear energy was recognized as a source of clean, dispatchable baseload power with both benefits for energy security and achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 7, which is affordable and clean energy. Canada is a top-tier nation in both environmental protection and nuclear energy and needs to demonstrate leadership towards this path in Canada and across the globe by the following actions. In Canada, it can do so by implementing policies that support deployment of nuclear energy and other large-scale sustainable solutions, such as the reduction of overlap and duplication amongst provincial and federal entities and their policies and regulations. And across the globe, leadership towards a pathway to net zero could be achieved by delivering energy security and affordable clean energy to reduce geopolitical pressures, which we are now seeing in the last 2 years. We advocate for this committee to continue its work to support Canada in protecting fresh water in a sustainable manner, while remaining cognizant of the important role that nuclear plays in our shared commitment to fight climate change and our pathway to net zero. But beyond the objectives of this committee's focus today, we advocate for you and all interested parties to work together to develop and deploy frameworks and solutions that will help individuals and organizations capable of addressing these challenges brought on not only by climate change on fresh water, but all of the challenges that climate change possesses, or sorry, brought on by all challenges that climate change, sorry, I'm very tired today, provides to us through natural systems and for a healthy ecosystem. So with that, the CNA and its members would like to thank you for your time, and we would be pleased to ask or answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. Baker, we'll go to Madame Maisot.
Good afternoon. I am Maria-Josée Maisot. I am a consultant in the agro-environment, and I work for the Fédération de l'UPA, Outaouais, Laurentides, that we cover some 2,500 farms, some 3,500 farmers, and some 3 million inhabitants. So it's a large proportion of the population that is really represented by our association. Agriculture is often pointed out as a source of pollution, but there are many environmental solutions that producers put in place. And I am here to represent the needs in terms of production and to provide support for agricultural producers. We celebrated the 100-year anniversary of the UPA agriculture, and this is something that is of great concern to us. So agricultural producers want to participate in the solutions, but they do need help, particularly on the ground. I've been listening to what has been said today, and it's very clear that various levels of government can make the situation very complicated. Much has to be done on the ground by all levels of government in terms of policies that apply to production. It's difficult for them, but it's difficult for us as well. But we can help them in reaching regulations that will be uniform and consistent. The first thing that we are asking of the federal government is to have Canada do everything within its ability, everything possible to correct the fragmented situation that is affected by urban development. This has an effect on the water and by default on the quality of the water. Access to the river on Ile de Laval is almost impossible in certain sectors. Their producers are obliged, because of that, to fall back on aqueducts to supply their crops. And that's very, very expensive. We are in a very dynamic agricultural sector, and I'm sorry, Madame, that we are losing the audio. I guess you're back. I guess you're back. Perhaps I moved. All the developments that are non-agricultural in nature can imperil the quality of water, and also access to water and to the riverbanks becomes a problem. And that, therefore, creates a greater problem for the water supply for producers in terms of the quantity of water that is required for production. Also, at this time, we have many mineral interests that are moving in to the territory that affect the agricultural land. We are also asking to have more help on the ground, more professionals who could come out and help us, more financial support. They ask producers to change their practices and to put in place solutions to conserve the soil and to fight climate change. All of this has been studied, and it has been demonstrated that indeed there are GHGs emissions that are there, but we do have to have a better capacity to retain water in the soil. There has to be a positive impact on the retention of water in the soil itself. We must reduce erosion, but all of that costs money, and we can have a negative impact on the short-term production, and there have to be technical. There has to be technical support on the ground. Thank you so much. We will begin our first round with Mr. Daltel. Thank you, and thank you for our witnesses.
About the nuclear issue. Madame Baker, un peu plus tôt dans la conversation.
Earlier in the conversation, we heard witnesses who spoke about the reality at Chalk River. I'd like to know what you think about that situation, please.
Question. I'm not familiar in any detail, any level of detail of the Chalk River NSDF project, and so I'd prefer not to comment on that. I don't have information about that. I wasn't involved, but I do understand, and I will say that I understand it went through a rigorous process through the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, as well as the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, which are robust review processes. And for what I understand, the Government of Canada's decision was that there would be no significant effects as a result of the project should the company, should CNL put in place the mitigation measures that were put forward, which they committed to. I also understand that there's a monitoring program that has been developed in partnership with the First Nation in the region. I don't know any details about it, but I understand that they will be involved in the monitoring, which will be a transparent process.
As you know, Canada is the second largest country in the world. Don't you think that we can find another place instead of closer to a river?
Again, I'm not part of that project. I can't comment on the process that they went through. I'm sorry.
OK. Monsieur le Président, de notre côté, nous, on n'a pas...
Chair, we don't have any problem with the development of nuclear energy. It is not the solution, but it is part of an overall solution. We look to what is occurring in the province of Quebec. The provincial parliamentary committee is looking at that, and nuclear power can be seen as a part of the solution, but not a standalone solution in and of itself. I'd like to know, Madame Jill, do you think that the small reactors, these small nuclear reactors, should be taken into account and considered when you have the theory of nuclear use, or are there other interesting things that can be taken into account?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I quite understand the translation of the question. I would say I completely agree that and the Canadian Nuclear Association has always been advocating that nuclear is a part of many solutions that are out there. And we've never said that we are the solution. We definitely recognize that the climate crisis is one of the biggest issues facing the globe, and we are in full support of all clean technologies that need to be put forward to address that issue, of which SMRs could very much be potentially part of that solution. SMRs have the capability, at least what I understand about the various technologies, is that they can contribute to both electricity, both on-grid and off-grid. But they're also a potential solution that we're looking into, the sector that is looking into, for helping to decarbonize the very difficult parts of the economy, such as industries that rely currently on fossil fuels, to potentially be a solution to that component of the Canadian economy that's very difficult to decarbonize. But I would ask Sarush, my colleague, if he wants to also answer that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and parliamentarians. Yes, so small modular reactors can produce high heat, which right now the industry relies on fossil fuels and so on. So small modular reactors or advanced reactors can produce high temperatures, which can be used for industrial applications. So that's one of the use they could have as well for remote sites to produce electricity. Right now, again, we rely on fossil fuels. So there are a number of applications. It's very different compared to large water reactors. Large water reactors are very beneficial as well, but different applications again. So to answer your question, yes, they do have applications for decarbonizing.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais prendre une autre question.
Thank you. I have another question from Madame Mezos. First of all, welcome to our committee. You spoke about agriculture, and in your region, the region of Montreal, we know that there has been a great catastrophe in the past with the appropriation of agricultural land for Mirabel. Are there other measures, better measures to protect land? Can you tell me how you came to be involved in this sector? That it is provincial in jurisdiction, but how is the federal government involved? Well, just to give you an example, with respect to Mirabel, they want to put an installation that would have been placed on federal territory, but it would have become too complicated. It would have been part of the federal land, but it has to be, though, a part of an agricultural zone that is there. But I mean, I have to say, honestly, I don't understand enough about it to speak about it myself. Well, thank you. But certainly something can be done to help in that area. Madame Châtel? Thank you very much, Chair. I have a question for Ms. Baker. In the process of consultation concerning Chalk River, and I know you're not a specialist in this matter, but there were concerns expressed by citizens in 2015. The Conservative government at the time delegated the authority for nuclear waste management to private enterprises. Do you think that for such a question, that is to say, managing nuclear waste, was that ethical? Was that moral for the government to do that? Wasn't it the responsibility of the government to come to a decision to be able to fully manage this type of waste, or some sort of government agency to do so?
Thank you for the question. I'm actually going to ask my colleague Sarush if he can address that one, because I don't have the history of that waste management decision, and I'm not Sarush does either, because he's from Europe at that time. But I'll ask him.
Oui. Bonjour, merci. En français.
Yes, I'll speak French. Thank you. Yes, the question about whether or not it should be private or publicly handled, that is to say, nuclear waste management. There are varying perspectives on this. In aviation, there is private involvement for certain agencies. In certain agencies, they can be very sure of the safety of the storage, but there are private mechanisms as well. And in some countries, there is a mixture of private and public involvement. But they want to be sure that the disposal sites are safe. It's a matter of transparency and of monitoring these sites. So it's really how the mechanism is put in place. Thank you very much. My question is for Madame Maison. Welcome to our committee. I was very anxious to hear what you had to say. You brought up the fact that there are various levels of government that deal with the management of water, and that has an effect as well for agricultural production. They have to deal with these various levels of government. The Canadian Water Agency that has been just created, are you aware of it? And its mandate is to ensure better cooperation between the levels of government and Indigenous peoples. What do you have to say about that? Well, listen, if you can have a follow-up, and if you can have this agency functioning in such a way as to bring together the levels of government, including municipalities, that would allow for the fast tracking of certain issues. For example, watersheds. I can think of one instance where there has been a 2-year-long wait for some action. Sometimes agencies can put brakes on solutions because of a lack of uniformity amongst the various levels of government, but this could correct it. Thank you. You said in your brief, you spoke to the success of programs in the Outaouais region. Can you explain what HELIS is doing in this area? What we do is we visit the producers. We're not inspectors, but we go to meet with the producers on their land and find out what they need, what they do, to preserve the grassland, the pastures. There is diversity. It's very important for water and also for climate change, to protect and conserve the soil. We give a financial compensation to producers who put these type of soil protection programs in place. So what we're really trying to do is mount a green infrastructure, farm by farm, project by project, according to the needs of the various producers. What is the type of need? What type of services do they need? Is it money? Is it do they need more knowledge? Do they need more time? We try to find the way to help them and to provide partners who would be able to work with them. It is a service that is adapted to each individual instance, one at a time, on a local basis, which allows the communities to develop locally, community by community. Thank you. Now, Madame Posé, 6 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you to our witnesses. I'll start with you, Madame Maisot. When we think about agriculture and climate change, we know that there are direct impacts on the water. That's one of the first things we think about, because if you look at what's happening in California, where there's a problem for fruit and vegetables for the rest of North America. But we also think about the availability of water. Is there a major problem in terms of water that the federal government is not reacting to? To my knowledge, well, here in Quebec, we're really provincial. We deal with provincial issues. Yes, but if you try to, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you're talking about availability of water. I'm thinking in terms of the infrastructure for that availability. Well, sure, it would be important to put in place educational programs, municipal programs, like in Laval, where there are producers that are directly connected to the aqueduct system for irrigation of their land. Well, those structures would ensure that when you plan aqueduct systems, you would allow for that need. if the farmers and producers needed to use that rather than just river water. But there are many projects. And I have to say that there are many pieces of legislation that could protect the groundwater in the soil for farmers. Thank you. I have 6 minutes. I want to ask questions of 3 witnesses. Mr. Pomeroy, we learned that Canadian oil producers have hidden the disastrous effects of the oil sands. You are Professor Emeritus. Can you speak to the direct negative effects of the oil sands on fresh water in Canada?
Yes, so of course the oil sands are on the Athabasca River, which flows north to form the Slave into Great Slave Lake and then the Mackenzie River to the Arctic Ocean. So the aquatic impacts are in that region. The aquatic sampling program has been extensive in there. The one concern, of course, is the storage of water from the oil sands extraction process, which the treatment of these ponds has been left to something in the future. It's crucial to ensure that they don't leak. Generally, they don't leak, but sometimes they leak a bit. And so that's a great concern aquatically. The other is restoration of these lands, and this is something that the Global Water Futures Program had research on, working out how best to regrow the forests and reproduce the wetlands, including under drought conditions. And you need deeper soils to do this, and so there's been tremendous expertise developed in how to restore the oil sands land to something more approximating a natural state. The other concerns you mentioned were the emissions to the atmosphere, which by airplane sampling they picked up zones that could not be picked up by existing sampling schemes on the ground. So the sampling schemes need to improve for the atmosphere. For the aquatic system, it's simpler because it's focused into the river. And so if you keep an eye on the river, which is being done very well, then I think that can be contained. But it's crucial that the plan is developed to deal with the liquid waste from the oil sands over time and not leave that for another half century.
Now I'm looking at policies here. You speak to the problem of the rivers, the ponds, the tailing ponds, and so on. So what, in terms of policy, could be done?
In terms of policy, this is part of should be part of integrated river basin management for the Mackenzie River Basin. There are vast natural ecosystems downstream, indigenous populations in a relatively lower political power jurisdiction, the Northwest Territories. It's not a province. The stance of many of the indigenous people is zero tolerance for contamination of their waters. And so that has to be assured through transboundary agreements, through a strong Mackenzie River Basin Board that has the authority to ensure that environmental conditions downstream are being met on all the time.
Thank you. And my question is for Ms. Baker now. In the new environmental impact legislation, the nuclear part was exempt. That's deplorable because bitumen is increasingly abundant in the waters, and there is radioactive waste that coming from Chalk River in large part can be detected in the aquatic waters. So this is something that is very serious for the people. You said earlier that you have concerns about fresh water. What do you think must be done, and what are you doing to be able to reduce the situation?
Thank you for the question, Madame Posé. I think you may be misinformed. The Impact Assessment Act does capture some nuclear projects. So I'm not sure what your source is there, but the Impact Assessment Act does capture
Pas les PRM, pas les petits réacteurs.
Not the small modular reactors?
Wants to pursue this?
Again, the small modular reactors are some of a certain size, so there is a limitation that they've put into the regulation called the project list. And so some SMRs are actually captured by the impact assessment,
Thank you.
depending on the size.
Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. My first question is to Ms. Tull. We are seeing just precedent-setting droughts in British Columbia, and it's impacting wild salmon populations, food security, the safety of our communities, ecosystems, local economies. Can you talk a little bit about what needs to be done? But also, you spoke to, and we've heard this from other witnesses, that BC isn't getting its fair share of funding, and especially when it comes to water funding. And so can you talk a little bit more about the regional inequities that need to be addressed?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So we've pulled data that we access through federal reporting, and what we've found is that between 2008 and 2022, Ontario received $224 million in federal freshwater funds for Great Lakes and Lake Simcoe protection and restoration. And then we saw, obviously, in budget 2023, a real historic commitment for $420 million over 10 years for the Great Lakes. So in a 25-year period, that's roughly $650 million in federal funds to freshwater in Ontario, which is needed. And we've also seen similarly in Manitoba, significant investments of $62 million between 2008 and 2022 for restoration, and another $111 million for the St. Lawrence Action Plan in Quebec. But yet we really haven't seen these federal funds allocated in British Columbia. Much of the federal funding for freshwater has been allocated through agreements with these specific provinces to assure the alignment in federal and provincial funding approaches. So this is really an opportunity where freshwater funding programs need to be allocated with provinces in British Columbia. And we're seeing that two of BC's major watersheds, the Fraser and the Mackenzie, have been named as priorities of the current federal freshwater action plan, and no funds have been committed to that. And so, when we look at what's currently allocated under the freshwater action plan, of the $650 million, only $420 million has been allocated, and that leaves less than $230 million for the rest of the country and those other priority river basins. And it's just woefully inadequate to the amount that is needed to make meaningful and lasting changes to get ahead of the crises that we're seeing.
It's really disappointing to hear, given that watershed health and function across BC are rapidly deteriorating, and the severity of the impacts of drought that we're seeing. Now, you spoke a little bit about the economic impacts of watersheds, and can you speak to how investing in watersheds, in the watershed sector as a whole, not only contributes to climate resilience, but also creating new employment opportunities, and talk a little bit about how this is a viable avenue for transitioning workers from traditional resource industries into watershed workforce?
Yeah, thanks for that question. This really is an opportunity for job transition into the watershed sector. It's timely, and what we've seen through the Working for Watersheds initiative that highlighted the watershed sector's really significant role in supporting jobs in BC, more than 47,000 people annually. There's a unique opportunity for workers in those traditional resource roles, whether that be heavy machinery, oil and gas, aquaculture, forestry, to pivot into this growing sector. So jobs within the watershed sector, they range from entry level to high skilled, seasonal to permanent, technical to policy-oriented roles, and they really can cater to individuals at various career stages. So whether that's youth entering the workforce or to experienced workers transitioning. And so the watershed sector is primed right now for further growth over the next decade. And with federal investments, particularly through mechanisms like the BC Watershed Security Fund that I mentioned earlier, it really can serve as a catalyst to foster growth in this sector, while also attracting other investments and creating opportunities for a just transition for workers that allows them to stay in their communities with family-sustaining jobs, and then an opportunity for them to be reinvesting back into their local economies.
Thank you so much. And to Mr. Pomeroy, you had talked about some concrete actions that we need to take, including national coordination, prediction, identifying vulnerabilities. Can you speak about some of the other actions that the federal government needs to take?
Yes. The first is fix the federal fragmentation. We have about 20 departments with water functions, 4 with large ones. The Canada Water Agency is being stood up, but these have not been coalesced into the agency. This is not working yet. We just added another fragment to the mess. So we need to do better than that. We have to put these in the agency and make that agency work. The second is collaborate. And we need national water leadership, not federal water leadership. And I have to say, we need to get out of Ottawa and into the provinces, territories, communities to see what's going on. Third is fund water science. We're seeing the shutdown of the largest freshwater research program in the world right now in Canada with no follow-on proposed. The third is fund observations. We have the equivalent of 64 experimental lakes areas, the Global Water Futures Observatories, that will shut down next year without further funding. So there's no continuity plan in these things. And then the final one is address the emergency. We have a drought of our history as a nation, from BC to Labrador, from the prairies to the Arctic. It's worse in Alberta and parts of Saskatchewan than in anyone's lifetime, and I'm not seeing much federal interest or response in it, and as a Westerner, I don't understand this. And look at what's happening in BC with the problems of hydroelectricity and water supply for communities, and on and on and on. Great Slave Lake hit the lowest water levels ever recorded this fall in the Northwest Territories. It's a disaster for the Mackenzie Basin, this gap.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll go to the second round. I'll do the same thing. I'll cut by about 40%. So, Mr. Cram, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with Dr. Pomeroy from the University of Saskatchewan, just downstream from the Lake Diefenbaker irrigation project. Could you share with the committee what are your views of the Lake Diefenbaker irrigation project?
Yes, that irrigation project is essentially completing the plan for the Lake Diefenbaker, which was a reservoir built for irrigation in the 1960s. Very little of that irrigated water use was taken up at the time. It's the largest water reservoir in the prairies, and it has tremendous capacity to support irrigation. That said, it was designed in a time when we had a mid-20th century climate and water regime. And this year, that reservoir received only 28% of its normal inflows. So there, I think going forward, we have to realize there will be times of great stress and water supply issues across the province. We also, when it was built and that was designed, there was no consideration of the downstream Indigenous communities in the Saskatchewan River Delta, the largest freshwater delta in North America, which has more or less dried out in the last few years, and the muskrat are wiped out. So water management of that irrigation system, we need to look at broader things than just irrigation. Yes, we can do that, but also hydroelectricity, water for communities, water for mines and other developments, and waters for the ecosystem in the downstream Indigenous communities, and make sure we're leaving enough left over from Manitoba for Lake Winnipeg and Manitoba Hydro. So it's these are difficult things, but with the appropriate prediction systems and multi-use operations of these reservoir systems, I think we can do it, and we can reduce some of the impacts of climate variability and extreme droughts and floods on the water systems in the Central Prairies.
And can you speak, you touched on it at the very end there, when it comes to climate adaptation, climate resiliency, can you speak about the benefits of irrigation projects such as this and others?
I think southern Alberta has shown tremendous economic input effects of this on its economy and on food exports with a diverse range of crops. Saskatchewan needs to look at this and make sure we have the marketing in place, that farmers want to irrigate and have the funding to do this, and that we're growing crops that are high value, that are used around the world. I think with climate change impacts in other agricultural regions, the interest in what Western Canada and Canada as a whole can grow will increase over time, and so that would be to the benefit of that project.
Okay, and I see I only have a few seconds left, Mr. Chair. So for the witnesses from the Canadian Nuclear Association, I wonder if you would be willing to make a written submission to the committee about the environmental impact and approval process with respect to water that new nuclear projects currently have to go through, and some suggestions about how to improve and streamline the process. And I think that's my time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Ms. Taylor-Roy for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I wish I had so much more time because I have many questions, but thank you to our witnesses for being here. And really what I'd like to focus on is how do we enforce a coherent strategy around water management? I heard testimony about, I think, some things that you looked at, Mr. Pomeroy, back in the, you said the 90s, that, were predicting what was going to happen, and things didn't change very much. And right now we're talking about the National Water Agency, which is amazing, and consolidating and coordinating and doing more research. But one of the problems I see constantly in Ontario, where I am, is that we're not all working in the same direction. And there are different priorities, different objectives. And one example of this is a highway, a connector highway called the Bradford Bypass in Ontario. It's going to be a small highway, 16 kilometers, costing over $1.5 billion. It's crossing the Holland River twice and having a huge impact on Lake Simcoe, taking up wetlands and farmlands and all of the natural infrastructure we need to keep. But the priority of the municipalities and the government is development, is putting in another roadway that will help with traffic congestion, which is real. But rather than looking at other options, they're sticking with a lot of the same solutions that we had before we had this climate crisis. And I think Lake Diefenbaker is a little bit the same from what you were saying. It's necessary, but it has to change in terms of how we look at it and what we do. How do you think we can address that? Because even if this Canada Water Agency does consolidate and do the research, if other levels of government are not going to move in the same direction, we are going to have a very hard time meeting our goals when it comes to water management and fighting climate change. And I'm sorry, this was from Mr. Pomeroy.
We have to be very careful that we don't regret our developments in a few decades because of the rapidly changing conditions that we have. Something you mentioned there, the road development, road salts from these heavily used in southern Ontario are in fact making the recovery of Ontario's lakes much more difficult because they cause stratification of the waters and therefore more phosphorus trapped in there, more algae blooms. So and this is recent science that came out of the University of Waterloo. These results had to be taken into the consideration of these developments and then mitigation measures. How can you develop the road without having those impacts? This is something Canadians have worked on for a long time and I think can be done. But we have to be planning for the hydroclimatic conditions of the mid-21st century, not for the mid-20th century. And that will be crucial for those things.
Thank you. Madame Posé, une minute et demie environ.
Minute and a half, Madame Posé. First of all, from Madame Baker, you didn't answer my question. What do you intend to do to evaluate the accumulation of radioactive waste because there's already been a contamination in the Outaouais River by tritium? So could you send that answer in writing? We hear a great deal about the Canadian Nuclear Safety Agency and the Water Agency. We hear a great deal about food safety. We talk about the Canadian Water Agency, but perhaps we should speak to how we have safe borders for food. Well, certainly that is becoming a priority with climate change because we're going to be receiving fewer imports from other countries. Other countries have problems as well. And it will be affecting many industries, much trade. But what we want to do is help our local production. We want to have the highest standards, environmental standards possible. We want to have measures in place to help our local farms stay healthy, stay sustainable, and keep their vital agricultural land. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Ms. Tall, my colleague Taylor Bacharach, the MP for Skeena-Bulkley Valley, moved a motion that was passed at this committee calling on the federal government to implement a $1 billion watershed protection fund with the help of the BC government and other investors. Could you explain why such a fund is essential?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, I commend this committee for passing that motion. It's critically important that we're seeing that the scale of investment that's needed. You know, the disasters like the droughts this past summer just continue to demonstrate the severity of the crises that we're seeing. I mean, the drought that's continuing right now, we're seeing drinking water supplies that for First Nations and municipalities that are dangerously low. You know, there's still the village of McBride is still in a local state of emergency for that. Ranchers are running out of hay and cattle. River systems are running low. Hydropower production, you know, is experiencing significant reduction due to those water levels. And investments allow us to get ahead of these crises. And it allows us to do the work that advances the potential to get to watershed security. Some research was done to look at what is the scale of need. And this is even on a generous side, but we're looking at like $3 billion a year, $3 billion that's needed. That's about $300 million annually that needs to be invested into our watersheds to get ahead. And that's like from rebuilding our natural defenses, so our forests, our wetlands, our stream banks. These are really the critical first line of defense against the climate crisis. We need to...
Yeah, sorry about that. Sorry to cut you off, but we have limited time. Mr. Leslie for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with Ms. Baker. It seems as though there's a lot of anti-nuclear sentiment around this table. And I think back to our Minister of Environment, Minister Guilbeault, tweet he had sent. I wasn't sure if it was before or after he was arrested, but it's time to close the Pickering nuclear plant. So I was, thankfully that has been ignored, but I'm curious your thoughts on any advice you might have as it relates to fresh water regarding the refurbishment of the Pickering nuclear generation station, or if you're aware of the minister's original tweet and that sentiment.
You're on mute, Ms. Baker.
Sorry, I thought that I was going to be automatically unmuted. I don't really follow Twitter that much, so I can't comment on the minister's tweet. The second part of the question, though, was, I'm sorry, could you repeat?
Advice as it relates to freshwater management regarding the refurbishment of the Pickering nuclear generation station.
Yeah, I actually don't know anything about how the operation of that plant specifically works, so I don't think I can answer it. I can say that, any refurbishment or any plant that operates in Canada is very closely regulated by the CNSC, and that includes its use of water. It's also regulated closely by, or monitored, I should say, by Environment Canada and Climate Change with respect to the quality of the water. And I would ask if Sarush has anything to add to that.
Thank you. So virtually all of the water intake from a power plant is rejected in the water. So when it comes to fresh water use, is one of the most sustainable way of using fresh water to produce energy. And when it comes to refurbishment, it's actually an opportunity to sort of bring new systems or components to actually make even better use of water when it comes to waste and so on, or even cooling. So refurbishments, it's just a matter of actually changing the system and components to extend the lifetime of a nuclear power plant. So it's an opportunity to improve even environmental footprint and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. And as an association, it must be rather frustrating seeing such an anti-nuclear sentiment across so many certain members of Parliament. I'm curious what sort of outreach you've done to try to educate. And I know our committee is looking at traveling to see an oil sands facility. I'm curious if you would be willing to have one of your members open up their doors so that we could go and see the work that is being undertaken with respect to nuclear waste, as well as the operations that increase the reliable baseload power while helping our environment here in Canada.
I assume the answer would be yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. We have to stop there, and we'll go to Mr. Ali as our last questioner. In the before we go to Mr. Ali, I just want to reassure Mr. Deltel that the names have been that he's asking for have been obtained, and we will be sending around a notice which has to be translated because it has to be in both official languages. So as soon as it's translated, it will be sent to all members of those names will be sent to all members of the committee. Mr. Ali.
Thank you, Chair. Professor Pomeroy, thank you so much for appearing today. You have depth of knowledge, and it was so much learning listening to you. I know you touched upon certain issues related to fresh waters, but I just want to go into more details in your views. Are there major issues related to fresh waters in Canada that the federal government is not adequately addressing? If yes, what are they and how could they be better addressed?
For the question, I believe there are three primary areas that could have a greater federal approach. One, as previously mentioned by experts for this committee, is improvement in water prediction. The provinces and territories need help. The big rich provinces have excellent computer models that do this. The Americans run everything on supercomputers. We don't. And some provinces are using Excel spreadsheets for their flood predictions. So we need to do better as a country on that, and we'll save ourselves money 20 to 1 by doing so. The second is transboundary waters. We don't handle them very well. We have not had severe transboundary stress in this country. I believe we're headed for it this year in the West and in the North. And we will see further issues with the Americans. 80% of Canadians live in shared waters with the United States. And we have to look after that relationship very, very carefully, as well as our interprovincial relationships to make sure we're staying a peaceful, friendly federation. The final one is last week I spent the morning with the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations in Saskatchewan, and the water problems they continue to have on source water protection, water supply, other issues for their communities are profound and severe. They also have a lot of ideas about solutions, so I think more engagement with them would benefit everyone, and certainly help them find ways through the current crisis that they have.
Thank you. As you know, the federal government is currently working to establish an independent Canada Water Agency with the legislation currently in the House. What do you think that agency's priorities should be as it builds capacity and starts to advance its work?
Yes, I was very happy to see the Canada Water Agency advancing. This is a long-held dream for many people who felt more federal leadership would be helpful here. The one is a focus on observations. It should have the active observations of water quantity and quality brought together and dispersed to Canadians in a national way through collaboration. Predictions added to those observations, they go together, and again, that national help to provinces, municipalities, territories, First Nations. Third, transboundary waters, looking after that transboundary water relationship. Fourth, integrated river basin management. We don't do it in Canada, and we're going to have to. Europe is doing this now between countries. We can certainly do this between provinces, and we will have to in order to adapt to the stresses that climate change puts on our freshwater moving forward.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pomeroy, for being here in person to share your experience, knowledge, and insights with us. Your testimony and the testimony of all the witnesses that have appeared today in both panels will help our analysts draft what I hope will be a very impactful report. So thank you to the witnesses. Thank you. You know, we look forward to, as I say, continuing this study and producing a report that reflects your perspectives. Thanks again. Merci aux députés. Merci aux membres. De se revoir.
Thank you to all the members.